Good morning, senior Bible class. As far as I can tell, this is your second to last week of your high school career. I'm sure it's a lot different than you thought it would be, but I hope you are able to relish it nonetheless. This is for the week of May 4th to the 8th. You have theoretically, assuming that you did it, you've finished reading Don't Waste Your Life. It's Saturday for me. I'm still in the midst of grading last week's work. It all comes in on Friday for me. Typically, I get about 75 emails with work. So I'm still working through those. I've read some of your sort of one-page responses. Don't Waste Your Life. Got some mixed reviews, some good and some bad, but I trust and I hope that you read it, and I hope that you took something meaningful from it. So we're done reading that per se, though I'm going to keep engaging with a little bit of his material here at the end. But you, for the last 2 weeks of senior Bible class, are going to kind of finish with a capstone writing assignment. It's called, What is the Mission of Your Life? You're going to get it to me by 3 o'clock on May 15th. As far as I can tell, that's the last day of your school. I'm not sure what the bosses are deciding, but that's the day we would have left for the senior trip. So that's the day that it is due. Here's an example from a friend of mine. This is a mission statement that he wrote for his family. You're going to write it. You can either write it with yourself as an individual in mind, or you can, if you want, you can kind of anticipate it as a family thing someday, if that's what you desire to do. But I'm going to give you a larger example from myself a little bit later on. But for now, here's another example of a mission statement that someone, a friend of mine, has written. He says, the mission of the so-and-sos is to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves by doing as much good as we can, for as long as we can, for as many people as we can. So the first and most basic thing that you're going to do is come up with and craft a mission statement for your life. Why do you exist? What is your purpose for living? It ought not be more than one sentence, but as you can see, it can have several parts that kind of fit together. It seems fairly helpful to me to kind of think of it in terms of a sort of a theory piece and a practice piece, sort of a truth and reality, a foundational side, but also a practical side. Okay, if we believe this over here on the left, on the right, what does that mean for our actions, our living? And you can see here this mission statement is certainly leaning into the active, which is what a mission statement should do. But part of it is a little bit more theoretical, loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. But then it becomes very practical by saying we're gonna flesh that out. We're gonna put that into practice by doing as much good as we can, so on and so forth. The first thing you need to do is carefully and probably slowly craft what you think is a mission statement for your life. It doesn't have to be perfect on the first go. If you want to throw yours at me before you get to writing the rest of this thing and get my feedback on your mission statement itself, please do. I'd be happy to offer you some feedback. You may want to engage with some realities of Scripture, some parts of Scripture, some foundational verses or truths. As you can see here, he's keying in on the answer that Jesus gives to the question, what is the greatest commandment? And then he adds his own thoughts there at the end by doing as much good as we can for as many people as we can for as long as we can. So capitalize on Scripture. If you don't really kind of see yourself, if you're not a Christian, if you don't see yourself in this camp for this assignment, that's still fine. You ought yet, indeed, to still answer this question: what is the mission of your life? What is the purpose of your life? Why will you get up and live every day? So try to put that into one sentence mission statement. Then you're going to write 2 pages explaining your mission statement in its various parts. I'm guessing that many of you may feel like you could slap down about 2 or 3, maybe 4 sentences, and you're going to be done. If that's the case, that's okay initially, but I want you to put more thought into it. That's an indication that you need to think further up and further in, dig more deeply into what is your life going to be about? Why are you going to get up every day and live? What are some of the foundational truths that your life is going to be based on? And then how is that going to, what difference are those truths going to actually make in your everyday life? How are you going to practically live based upon the purpose of your life? So if I were you, I would not wait till the night before to do this, because I think it will stink if you do that. I would try pretty early on the next day or two to begin thinking through what is a statement that captures the mission of my life, and then begin to kind of flesh out its constituent parts. I've attached a longer version of these instructions to the weekly email and uploaded them as a document to RenWeb. And then later in this video, I'm going to show you the example that I have written for myself and my family, so that you will have a bit more of an idea about what I'm asking you to do. Please send me questions via email as you have them. So now that you're done reading is what you're going to be up to for the next 2 weeks. We're going to have one more video next week, but the assignment will be the same. So a video right now and then one next week, but then this writing assignment covers 2 weeks. This particular video is going to engage a little bit with Chapter 8. I'm not going to do exactly the same thing that I've done in the past as far as Piper's content goes. But anyway, no need to leave a comment this week unless you're just in the mood. But I am later on going to get to the example that I want you to, you don't have to copy what I've done, but I would like for you to at least see it and perhaps let it get your creative juices flowing. Chapter 8, let me double check and remember that I got my number right. This is actually Chapter 8, pretty sure it was. Making much of Christ from 8 to 5. Has to do with magnifying God, being satisfied in God, glorifying God in your work. Now, I think this is one of the topics that Christians today are a little bit confused about. I think in our current church setting, we've begun to kind of separate out our work life and our church life, our spiritual lives on the one hand, and then our, every other day life, or Jesus stuff and real life stuff. And that is not a biblical idea. If nothing else, Piper, I think, is inviting us to bring all of life under this great heading of being satisfied in and glorifying God with all that we are. So now he turns to the concept of work. I am not going to do a great deal of referring to what he says, mostly because you guys did a pretty good job of engaging with the chapter that he wrote. If you'll recall, the six ways that he proposes that we magnify Christ in our work, and you guys did well at kind of just distilling those out. So I'm going to refer to them just briefly later, but for now, I just want to start with a quote from Piper toward, I think, the beginning of his chapter. He says, "You don't waste your life by where you work, but how and why you work." And he's trying to say, there are not more spiritual jobs per se. The pastor, the minister, the missionary is not more important than everybody else just because his job seems to have more of a spiritual edge to it. Rather, the key realities are how and why you work. And I think that's a very helpful paradigm to kind of help us think through this concept. To dig into this, I want to dip into an ancient story way back from the beginning of the Bible, which you may recall us visiting many moons ago in Old Testament. So, think about those two words, how and why we work, and think of those concepts through the lens of the tower builders in the story of the Tower of Babel. From Genesis 11, how and why are these people working? Moses says in the word of the Lord, "Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly.' And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth.' And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, 'Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech.' So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth." So, why do you think they are working? These tower builders, these city builders, what is their motivation for working? Well, first, before we dig into their motivation, just notice their work in general. They have produced, or are at least using, the most cutting-edge technology of the day, the brick. Notice we're told that they want to make bricks, or they do make bricks, and they have bricks instead of stone. Why do you think they have bricks instead of stone? What's the point of that? Bricks in this day are the smartphone of the age. They are the most cutting-edge technology in this age. I know that's kind of hard to imagine, but that's part of why the author is telling that to us here. Bricks, I don't know a great deal about construction, but I imagine it seems that bricks were, you could build stronger, better, taller, more lasting buildings with bricks. And so they are highly skilled and highly successful entrepreneurs, you might say, using cutting edge technology for their work. But if we dig into their motivation for work, why they're working, I'd like to offer that there are three reasons for their work, and these, I think, provide the foundation for why God is displeased with their activities. When On the one hand, you might say he would be delighted at the developments that they've made with the earth that he has created. But in this case, it is their motivation and their reason for working that God is displeased. Notice three things. First, they are working for security with sort of a garnish of affluence. Notice they say, "Let us build ourselves a city." Cities in the ancient world, especially in biblical theology, were sort of symbols of affluence, and they were particularly built for the sake of security from surrounding potential enemies. You think of like the walls of Jericho or even the walls of Jerusalem as they're discussed in the Bible. Many ancient cities were walled to protect, actually provide security for the lives that they were creating. Living out in the middle of nowhere would subject yourself to the potential that your life would be ransacked and lost. And a city was something that could provide you security. But second, they are also after, through their magnificent work, power and control. They say, let us build a tower with its top in the heavens. So not only are they building a city, but they're building a tower within that city. And when I was a kid, I used to think that they were just trying to build a really tall tower so that they could like literally get to God and kind of give him a high five, because he's up there and we're down here. But that is obviously not what's going on here. This is probably, you may be familiar with these, an ancient ziggurat, essentially an ancient temple that was a place for mankind to meet with the gods. It was sort of a halfway point between heaven and earth, as it were. Well, these tower builders they're trying to get themselves, as it were, into the heavens. See, now the gods were those who controlled the destinies of man on earth, who actually controlled the happenings of the earth. And so these tower builders are imagining themselves and desiring to get into heaven themselves and to put destiny in the palm of their hands. They are seeking power and control over their lives. But thirdly, notice they're also living for glory and reputation. They say, "Come, let us make a name for ourselves." They're seeking a glory and a legacy, a reputation perhaps that will even span beyond their own lifetime. A person's name would live on after themselves. This city and this tower were a means to their own glory and reputation. So notice these three things that they're seeking, and then come back to our questions. How and particularly why are they working? They're seeking security and affluence, power and control, glory and reputation. And God essentially comes down and says, you're playing God. I am the one who gives security. I am the one in control, and my glory alone will be had, and I will not give it to another. And so he ruins their sort of humanist self-manufacturing efforts to create the good life for themselves. So, will you consider, as you kind of think back to what Piper wrote in this story of the Tower of Babel, what are the motivations, the why, the answers to the why questions in your heart for the work that you want to do as you head into life after high school? What are you seeking? Why do you want to work? What is your motivation? How can you magnify, honor, and serve Christ in your work? Just to briefly offer a few things from Piper, I think his list is helpful in a lot of ways. And I kind of saw this coming together, though it's a little bit hard sometimes to hold these two things together. I see this coming together of two different kind of strands of thought. Um, what does it mean to magnify Christ in our work? It seems to me that there's kind of some spiritual leaning answers to that question and some physical leaning uh, answers to that question. Piper offers, these are not mutually exclusive, by the way, but I kind of wanted to offer them in categories and then think about how they go together. Some ways to magnify and honor God in your work that have a little bit more of a spiritual edge to them. Having fellowship with God throughout the day, his discussion of that was very sweet and helpful. Adorning the gospel with our work, not slandering the word of the gospel by sloppy, lazy, bad work. Good work done well adorns the gospel. And of course, his last point was evangelism, using the relationships that God puts us in to tell people about Jesus so that they might have life. But there was also a more physical side, a more earthy side to some of the ways to magnify Christ at work. One of them is through our creativity and industry, right? Do excellent work. A Christian ought to make good tables and chairs and computer software and food and teach well and do excellent work in whatever it is you're called to do. Helpfulness and service to neighbor and making money for the kingdom. I put a question mark there because that, to me, could kind of bounce into either category here. Now, these are not, again, mutually exclusive. And in fact, I think they demonstrate that you and I God made us to be sort of embodied spiritual creatures. We really cannot separate out the spiritual and the physical. I think they're distinct, but they're interconnected. This is true in the Tower of Babel story. Their physical work was inextricably bound up, both with the kind of human culture that they were embedded in, but also the motivational realities that lay underneath their work. So, as you head out into the working world, do not pretend that these are completely able to be separated from one another. Now, I think Piper's right. Without people knowing Jesus, there's a certain pointlessness to someone observing that we're a good worker if in the end they die and go to hell. And yet at the same time, it seems to me that Scripture teaches us that God loves the earth that he has made, and he values our good work done well to his glory in a kind of mysterious and transcendent way. And so I invite you to hold these in each one of your hands and see your work as something to do for the sake of God's glory, for the sake of your neighbor, and to put to death those selfish motivations that creep in for every one of us that are evident in the story of the Tower of Babel. In the sort of second part of this lesson, then, I want to pivot and give you some thoughts from another good author. His name is Os Guinness, and he's written a book called The Call. And his main thesis, or at least one of his main theses, if you will, is that every single person, and in this case, particularly the Christian, is called, or another way to put that would be, our lives are a calling, and in this context, our work is actually a calling. Piper, I think, at one point calls the everyday work of a Christian, it's an office and a calling. And what Guinness is trying to point out is that If we have a calling, then that means that we have a caller, and that caller is God. So I need you to stay with me for another 10 to 15 minutes. And rather than give you condensed bullet points and so on and so forth, I'm gonna read 7 or 8 excerpts from his book and briefly comment on them here and there. I know you're weary of school, and you're probably already weary of this video. But slap yourself in the face, pause, and go get something with caffeine. Let me invite you to really stay with these last few minutes and key in on what Os Guinness has to say. Will you do that? We're almost home. He says this: calling is the truth that God calls us to himself so decisively that everything we are, everything we do, and everything we have is invested with a special devotion and dynamism, lived out as a response to his summons and service. May that sentence get you going for the work that God is calling you into. The trouble is that as modern people, we have too much to live with and too little to live for. This is getting after the motivation for work, the purpose of our work, the why for our work. He says some feel they have time, but not enough money. Others feel they have money, but not enough time. But for most of us, in the midst of material plenty, we have spiritual poverty. May that not be true of your life and my life. May we not give our lives over to material plenty, even as we have spiritual poverty. In the biblical understanding of giftedness, gifts are never really ours for ourselves. We have nothing that was not given to us. Our gifts are ultimately God's, and we are only stewards, responsible for the prudent management of property that is not our own. This is why our gifts, our skills, are always, quote, ours for others, end quote, whether in the community of Christ or the broader society outside, especially our neighbor in need. This is also why it is wrong to treat God as a grand employment agency, a celestial executive searcher to find perfect fits for our perfect gifts. The truth is not that God is finding us a place for our gifts, but that God has created us and our gifts for a place of his choosing, and we will only be ourselves when we are finally there. His point here is that God has actually gifted you and created you to do something. And he, by his grace, is slowly putting you there as a steward of the gifts that he has given to you. He says to make the choice of career or profession on selfish grounds without a true sense of calling is probably the greatest single sin any young person can commit, for it is the deliberate withdrawal from allegiance to God of the greatest part of time and strength, or in that part of our lives that takes up the greatest part of our time and strength. And he's quoting Archbishop William Temple here. Will you see the work that God is inviting you into as a calling from his mouth to your ears and into your heart? He says the modern world has scrambled things so badly that today we worship our work, we work at our play, and we play at our worship. And then I'm going to kind of finish this little section with a lengthy quote. Takes up 3 or 4 slides. And again, I'm sorry, but I wanted to give you someone else's thoughts with just a few of mine. Stay with me and see what you can glean from his kind of summarizing thought here. He's offering several different approaches to the big question of what is the purpose and point of this life. He says, if we only live once, how are we each to discover a purpose that can make this brief life fully worthwhile, however long it turns out to be? What is the meaning of life itself? Consider the big three answers, which for all practical purposes cover the range of options offered in the modern world today. The first is the Eastern answer. And again, the question is, what is the meaning of life itself? What will make life worth living? The first is the Eastern answer, which includes Hinduism and Buddhism. If the final reality is an impersonal ground of being, the so-called undifferentiated impersonal, what is the purpose of life for each of us as individuals? The answer in brief is, forget it and forget yourself. We take ourselves seriously only because we are caught in the world of illusion. So to seek fulfillment as individuals is to make matters worse and perpetuate the desire that perpetuates the craving and perpetuates the attachment that keeps us bound to the wheel of suffering. So detachment is the key in this approach. Seen from this perspective, freedom is not freedom to be an individual, but freedom from individuality, through detachment and renunciation by one path or another. Humanity must be cut from the darkest forest of delusion, says Lord Krishna in the Hindu scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita. So the first Eastern answer is detachment. The second is the secularist answer, which includes atheists, most agnostics, naturalists in science, and a large number of humanists. If the final reality is chance, and there is no God, or gods of the supernatural, to consider, if there is no God to consider, and everything is just up to chance, then purpose is up to each of us to decide and achieve for ourselves, by ourselves. We don't discover it, that is purpose, we decide it. In Friedrich Nietzsche's words, our challenge is to turn every it was into a thus I willed it. In Bertrand Russell's view, we are each to be a weary but unyielding atlas, carrying on our own shoulders the world of our own making. And like Frank Sinatra, we must each do it my way. So the second answer to the purpose question is the secularist answer. Make and decide purpose rather than discovering it from some transcendent place. And the third is the biblical answer, which is common to both Jews and Christians and is the main shaping force of the dynamic sense of purpose characteristic in Western civilizations. From this perspective, the final reality is neither chance nor an impersonal ground of being, but an infinite personal God who has created us in his image and calls us into relationship with himself. Our life purpose, therefore, comes from two sources at once, who we are created to be and who we are called to be. Not only is this the call of our Creator, the source of the deepest discoveries and growth in life, it also gives our lives an inspiration and a dynamism that transforms them into an enterprise beyond any comparison. Have you concluded that your desire for purpose is an illusion? Then follow the Eastern masters to their various states of detachment. Have you determined that your purpose is something you must figure out yourself and accomplish all on your own? There are many secularist thinkers to cheer you on in the attempt. Or are you open to the possibility that there is one who created you to be who you are and calls you to be who he alone knows you can be? Then listen to Jesus of Nazareth and his two words that changed the world. Follow me. This is not time to fall for the lazy person's mantra that differences don't make a difference. This is no time to mouth empty slogans such as make a life, not a living, when the only difference between the two is the words. This is not a time to allow people to mumble on about callings when they don't realize there can be no calling without a caller. Survey the restless panorama of the human quest for purpose and fulfillment, and you will see the empty and inadequate answers drop out of the running. And at the end of your examination, you will see that the real notion of calling is the ultimate why for human living. Answer the call of your great Creator. Become an entrepreneur of life and see all of life as an enterprise transformed by his call. Count the cost, consider the risks, and set out each day on a venture to multiply your gifts and opportunities, bring glory to God, and add value to your world. Answering the call Jesus is the road to purpose and fulfillment. in your life. Oh, senior, will you hear those words of Jesus, as it were, as he makes eye contact with you and says, follow me. This week's, or this kind of closing writing assignment, is an attempt to kind of channel this reality. So what I'd like to do is kind of offer you an example of what I have done so that you don't feel free, you don't have to sort of do exactly what I have done, but to kind of give you a little bit of an example of what I have in mind for you. This is what I have written for the Sly household. So anyway, terrible timing and organization in putting this at the end of this lesson because I've been reading quite a bit, but nevertheless, slap yourself on the other side of your face and stick with me. Long for you to have some useful, fruitful, beneficial time of thinking through the purpose of your life, the functional, working purpose of your life. So again, the idea is come up with a mission statement for your life and then flesh it out in 2 pages. And here's the way that I have done that. The Slys exist to glorify God by treasuring him supremely in and above all things, and by seeking first his kingdom with our time, talent, and treasure. So that's the mission statement that I have come up with for my family. I've been working on it for a couple of years, actually, so sorry that you get a week or so. But this is me trying to work that out. That the Slys exist is a benevolent gift of God in itself. Why should we be brought into existence, into a magnificent world full of goodness, beauty, and delight? Nevertheless, we live, and for that we are grateful to our great God. Moreover, that the Slys are children of God is a yet more magnificent gift from God. Why should we, who are but wicked, lost sinners, be counted among God's people? Yet we live, not just in body, but in heart and soul. God has given us new life, and life abundant at that. These 2 foundational realities, namely, that God is our Creator and Redeemer, compel us to glorify him in whatever we do. These are the 2 streams of gratitude and glorification in our lives. We will live in this beautiful world that God has made, enjoying it in all its created glory. But we know that its glory is really just derivative of God himself. Created glory is to God as the rays of the sun are to the sun itself. We will constantly look along the rays of creation to see the beauty and glory of the Creator. We will treasure God in all things, and yet above all things. Yet we also treasure him, we will also treasure him when all things are taken away from us. Though he slay me, I will hope in him. Believing that his steadfast love is better than life, we will enjoy God with a special potency and sweetness during times of want, poverty, and suffering. Affliction will not surprise us or ruin us. Rather, we will seek to be sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. We know that we possess him in all things, and all things in him when they are taken away. He is our greatest satisfaction, delight, and lasting, untouchable joy. May our wants and our welfare drive us to him. Because God is our treasure in and above all things, we are then free to seek his kingdom rather than our own. We will not seek to self-manufacture a material kingdom of our own on earth, but will pursue the coming of God's heavenly kingdom. We will not seek the food that perishes, but the food that leads to eternal life. Our security in God's love will free us to love others, both our friends and our enemies. Our security in God's care and providence will free us to give generously. The generous life we seek to live will involve all that we are, especially our time, our talent, and our treasure. We will plan and make schedules, seeking to live an ordered life. Yet, we will always be willing to sacrifice these plans and schedules to meet the needs of others. A change of plans will not stand in the way of generosity. Instead, we will understand our time to be the Lord's, and we'll yield it in service to his kingdom. We also believe that God has gifted and called each one of us uniquely. We will happily use our gifts for the sake of others, seeking to add value and life to the world around us. We also believe that our words as image bearers of God are a gift from God to be used in service to him. Thus, we will tell the people God puts in our lives about Jesus. We will also think and plan and dream about ways we can grow our relationships with unbelievers, trusting that God is the one who saves. Having been purchased by the blood of Christ, we will offer our bodies as a living sacrifice to God. Finally, because God is our treasure, we need not seek earthly treasure, but are free to give our money and material resources. We will consistently tithe to our local church, and we will give above and beyond our tithe to particular needs that arise, trusting that God will take care of us. We will seek to be wise, yet we'll be willing, like the woman who anointed Jesus with perfume, to give in ways that may seem wasteful. We will also use our home for hospitality, looking especially to invite those on the fringes into our family. As we seek to live such a life, we will happily depend on God in everything. His grace will be our source of life, the fountainhead from which we live. Even as we live and move in the world, we will ever seek to say, "O God, a day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere." So again, you don't have to copy what I have done, but I wanted to give you an example of what I mean by fleshing out the details of your mission statement. I'm guessing for many of you, this may feel like a strange and foreign concept, or just kind of a weird thing to do. Write me an email. Tell me how you're feeling, what you're thinking. Let me try to help you along in it. What I desire is that you think critically, kind of forward into the next length of your life to say, what is the point? What is the mission of my life? Why should I get up every day and live? Remember, some of this, in fact, all of it is aspirational and ideal. Who, of course, is ever going to live these kinds of things perfectly or even very well? But nevertheless, just because we will not do these kinds of things perfectly does not and ought not keep us from seeking to live for God's glory. So there's an example. You can refer also back to the mission statement example that I gave you at the beginning. I will put the instructions for this assignment in RenWeb and in the email. Let me know if you have any questions. Love you guys. Miss you all.